Hello, everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to send greetings to my online community who has taken the time out to participate in yet another important discussion. I would further like to commend the team of 5G Americas for their pivotal role in shaping the future of connectivity through these series. I believe that we all benefit in the region. And as we discuss the perspectives surrounding the advancement of 5G as well as the transition to 6G, I think it's very important for us to really, take part in these discussions, even keeping the chat, because sometimes I go back and check the chat. So please feel free to put your comments and notes. Finally, before I dive into my presentation today, I'd like to take this opportunity to say to my fellow colleagues in the regions, we are in your thoughts and prayers. The news of the devastation left us in a state of flux. Jamaica went through it, but parts of our island was spared, but parts of the island was damaged. And I know a number of us in the region suffered. So continue to strive forward. We're resilient people in this region, and I know it'll just make us better. So thank you once again for this opportunity. Okay, so today we're going to touch on a few areas. We're going to talk about the evaluation of spectrum. How do we apply it? How do we evaluate? How do we assign it? The adoption of the technologies that are using in the 5G, moving to 6G in the sandboxes, trials around the world and within our region. We also want to take a look at government strategies. What are the governments doing to facilitate or to push this innovation that is taking place to the next generation? And we have to keep it real. We have to look at deployment, what is happening, who is deploying 5G, what has been the uptake, what has been the outcome. And then finally, we want to say beyond the 5G, where do we go and what policies, again, can actually assist that motion forward. So this slide really just gives a depiction of, the timelines associated with a different generation. 2G right back up on where we are, which we are really in 5G mode in some instances, although some of us, like Jamaica, has not adopted 5G as yet. We're still, trying to get more coverage on LTE 4G technologies and reaching those remote areas. But there is hope because on the horizon, I do believe 5G is coming. I'm going to make a prediction in maybe 2024, late 24, 25, we may see a flavor of 5G coming into the region. But what we know that, again, speed is everything. It's faster and allows for much more in terms of applications. Now, 5G is still in its early stages of its life cycle, as depicted in the graph right here. You see where we have, even at the bottom of the graph, you see 3G, and it's almost looking like there is a need to sunset 3G come the end of 2024 in maybe many spaces. However, we'll see in terms of island states such as ours, how this really fits into the plan of the global sphere. Now, 4G is considered a mature product, and it has peaked, and it's like now on a slight decline, not a serious decline like in the case of a third generation, but slight decline. And upcoming, is again 5G. It's still the new kid on the block because, again, it's not deployed in many facets. Some countries, and we're going to deep dive into that, but not all. To say the world has adopted 5G is not really the truth right now. Some of us are still in testing mode. Now, there are many cases as to why we should do it, however, and again, it's depicted right here: manufacturing, energy, the oil rigs, monitoring the rigs, monitoring the temperatures, the grid management, power, making sure that, the necessary checks are done to ensure that the technical losses, for example, on the power poles are mitigated or minimized. And if there is any damage on the poles, that again, there are redundancies or compensation done with robotics to ensure that these areas are brought back online on the grid seamlessly until a power crew can get to the location. Public safety, definitely a must. And again, healthcare is still in its embryonic form, and persons are still a little bit skeptical about remote surgery. But again, over time, this product will improve, as we move forward with that testing and pushing the boundaries. And finally, public transportation, which is also critical. The movement of people in a country is a far greater effort than many think. We take it for granted, but being a part of transportation in my ministry, there are a number of moving parts to that. Now, we've seen the value of 5G business to business. I mean, in terms of digitization and connecting more and more vertical industries, and they're clear here, the smart ports, the factories, as I stated before, a lot more automation, less persons are there, their machinery, they're just really trained to operate machinery in these spaces. Again, that's a safety factor. And again, it's not that we're replacing persons, but there's now a need for higher thinking, which is a good thing. Smart mining, which is also critical because there have been many, horrific cases of mining accidents in small townships. And it's something that if we put the right technology in place, it will also save lives and mitigate losses for the company. Likewise for oil fields. Now, interestingly enough, we still see the player here as LTE taking up 51.6% of this private network adoption. Although you see on the other side of the pie, there is now a move to 5G, as well as a mixing of the two generations, both LTE and 5G. So again, you see that gradual shift is taking place. Now, we want to look at this, we want to deep dive in this a little bit more. Adoption of 5G and the actual usage of 3G, 4G, and 5G all in one space. So the early 5G adopters, including mobile technology operators in Australia, mainland China, Hong Kong, Korea, and the US, they all launched 5G at a very small scale. I mean, as early as 2021, you see the early adopters, 2022. And among the jurisdictions surveyed, I think India was the last to launch its 5G service in this year, in February 2024. And the two MNOs are testing it in select areas. Now, over the past year, most MNOs analyzed continue their respective 5G deployments, aiming at increasing the 5G availability and uptake. Consolidation also continues, as we saw in the graph previously. And in 2023, I believe the MNO is merging from 4 to 3 in Thailand and 5 to 3 in Taiwan. So again, there's also talk of New Zealand. I think Vonage is seeking clearance to acquire 100% of dense air, I think. It's a wireless broadband service that are provided in New Zealand. So what is happening? Consolidation, merger, acquisitions, and again, more room for them now to push to the next level to deploy 5G. So in region 2, we have seen this shift taking place to where we have the trials and of course the commercially available in select areas. And here they are on the chart, the players in the market. So typically the spectrum bands identified in the Americas, the first and second digital dividend of the 600 and 700 megahertz bands. And then there is a 3.5 gigahertz band, which is the pioneer mid-band for the 5G in most countries. And there are several bands above 24 gigahertz, varying significantly across the countries. But all countries, with the exception of Paraguay, have completed and done trials with operators and equipment and manufacturers. So these are the persons right now who have gone and done this type of deployment. So globally, however, when we look on a global scale in terms of 5G spectrum, there is that use of time division duplexing, where again, time is that change when they're sharing the spectrum bands and frequencies. So you have this happening in North Africa, Northeastern Europe, Latin America, which you mentioned before, South Africa, Middle East, and it goes on right down to the Asian Pacific. And again, one looks at the bands that are being utilized by the color code: 2.3 gigahertz, 2.6 gigahertz, 3.5 gigahertz, and the 4.9. These are bands that they're using. Now, interesting enough, a number of countries each use bands for mobile services. And again, based on the data that I've collected, and Cullen actually helped me with this data by pulling on their benchmarks, you find that countries are using for the low bands, for example, I mentioned 600 megahertz, 700, the mid bands from the 1800s, 1900, and the high bands at 26 gigahertz. So let me take an example out of this pool. So Brazil, for example, they use the 15 megahertz between, I think, 14 to 27 and 15, 18 megahertz. AWS, they did, I think, 1770, the 1780, and then also 2170 megahertz to 2200. And again, they use the 3.5 gigahertz. I think the name of that telco is Enacom. They used that. That was their topology. And in the high bands, they went and used between 24.25 to 27.50 gigahertz, as well as 37 to 43.5 gigahertz. Mexico, on the other hand, they used at the low bands 600 and 700, the mid bands 2.5 to 2.69 gigahertz. And again, they use the 3.3 and 3.6 gigahertz. And on the high bands, they use a range of 24.25 to 27, 37, and 42 to 43 in the higher bands. So again, what we're seeing, I think, the trials of just doing the configs a particular way. So where are we in the whole transition in terms of these bands and reuse of the bands and reuse of repurposing of the spectrum? Now, based on this analysis, again, provided by Colin, the global 5G already reached 1.6 billion subscribers. That's a huge number. But again, if you look at it relatively, it's still small. So although they boast networks of over 300, sites of 1.8 million, and subscribers, as I said, at 1.6, and devices are over 2,000 now, you see there was a peak, went up by over 105% in LATAM. And again, and the Caribbean, sorry. And you see there is a gradual trend of increasing. It's constantly increasing. In this neck of the woods, however, in the Americas, Chile was the first country in Latin America to allocate the 3.75 to 3.8 megahertz band for industrial use in 2019. The Brazilian regulator, Anatel, approved the technical conditions for the use of the radio frequency band for private networks in the 3.7 gigahertz and the 28 gigahertz band in 22. And it's also defined specific coordinates of interference avoidance measures. So again, ensuring that even though there's services within the country, that they mitigate it either by using the time difference or by distance. Colombia also allowed the use of the 3.5 band for technical 5G trials, and it was included also industrial networks. So as we go through now to the whole matter of FDD and the subbands, 3 gigahertz bands are all migrating to 5G. We're seeing that trend definitely based on the data we just presented. And it is said that 131 sub 3 gigahertz 5G networks will be in effect 5 years by 2027. And 71 of those networks will be sub 3 gigahertz. So again, it is trending to that. So if it is, whoops, sorry about that. If it is, you notice a C-band is only 25%, whereas a C-band plus a sub 3 gigahertz is 70. So persons are more and more utilizing this configuration versus the other. Now, why the possible strategies to boost this adoption are clear. So there has been incentives. I mean, they're using the spectrum already. They're just repurposing in some cases. But there are also guidelines that promote passive infrastructure network sharing that also kind of reduce the costs of 5G deployment. Looking at granting operators access to publicly owned infrastructure, or as we saw in the case before, where there are mergers of MNOs. So again, they're utilizing more infrastructure in place because of a wider reach when consolidation takes place. They're also partnering with government and using government buildings, the street lights, and even traffic light facilities to again, propagate the different antennas. And again, one of the things that regulators are trying to become more agile in looking at license to ensure that we are putting not only the terms and conditions of how you should use a spectrum efficiently, but also deployment. Where are you deploying? Not that everybody must be in one urban area. The rural areas, the unconnected, must be reached. So these are now the type of assignments, requirements that are placed on the license. And in some instances, there is direct funding. I mean, in the case of China, they get their funding from the government, they get grants. But I notice also that there are private funding firms that will actually come in and assist MNOs in their development and research. So things are really changing. Now, how is the spectrum really being allocated or assigned rather? We've seen the auction taking place. Pretty much auction and covered obligation on this list takes precedence. And again, this is really stemming, I believe, from 2020 when the world went online, in fact, and learned how many people were not really connected. So again, the coverage obligation is very important. Auction to ensure fair parity and that may the best person win with in terms of pricing, that it's not given away. And in some places, beauty contests, but not that popular anymore, or even direct assignment. Only again, China and certain countries do direct assignments for the good of the nation or for because of their infrastructure and their policies of government. Now, this is a very interesting slide. And again, going back to what I said before. So China is the largest 5G market in the world, both in terms of network deployment and the 5G customers. And we know why, because of how it is being deployed on a national scale. At the end of 2023, there were 3.38 billion space stations in China against 2.3 reported in 2022. And they continue to roll out to increase the 5G uptake. And this information came from their Ministry of Industry and Information and Technology. So as of September 2023, over 37% of mobile subscribers are using 5G in Japan, which is great too. So Japan is following right on the heels of China, as against 28% in the same period in the previous year. Hong Kong, the share of 5G subscribers had reached approximately 24, up from 17% from the previous year. And in Taiwan, 5G adoption is estimated approximately 26% of wireless customers in 23, against 16 in 22. Remarkably, the coverage of the population in the EU with 5G services increased from 14 in 2020 to 81 in 2023. That's impressive. So again, we're just showing right here B2H value. And again, 50% of 5G network provides fixed wireless access for homes, boost market share and revenue. And as you can see, the numbers are right in front of you. The MNOs are hidden, but you can see the profit has gone up exponentially from when, in terms of sharing growth and revenue across all parts of the world: LATAM, Africa, Asia, Western Europe, the Middle East, and it is there for all to see. Now, as it relates to B2C, the value has gone up 10 times the user experience and 5 times for data usage compared to 4G. And this is evident because of the speed of which 5G offers in comparison to 4G. So you see the movement here from 4G phone, where we're looking now 4G to 5G. It is really almost a doubling up, 4.8 times. So again, hence why persons are moving to go to this more efficient system, which proves to be faster and more efficient in use of spectrum and even cost of operations in some instances. In the long run, it is actually better operationally. So in summary, on these couple of slides that I've done for you, TDD mid-band with continuous large bandwidth for global 5G network is what we're seeing as a trend. FDD sub 3 gigahertz bands are all migrating to 5G NR. 4 to 5 more times spectrum is possibly required for each new generation. So we're getting geared up for what is going to be for the 6th generation with the mobile networks and the MNO's demand. So the efficiency factor will be important, however, because again, IMT has always gotten the spectrum at all the RRCs, but again, it is just demand and supply. 5G promises to bring value to B2C, to B2H, and to B2B markets. And we saw that demonstrated quite clearly from the graphical information benchmark from Colin. And 5G advanced pilots used 3.5 gigahertz, use 6 gigahertz, or the millimeter wave bands to reach the 10 gigabits. So 6G may need more spectrum in the mid-band, millimeter wave, or even higher bands, something that we're going to be looking at. So, policies to encourage 5G and beyond and their deployment. So a number of policies have been adopted for 5G, and I think it will continue for 6G as well. Planning of sites and small antennas, facilitating rural deployment, very critical. ROW access to public and private infrastructure, sharing and co-deployments. Even though it's not that popular, I think this is something that, we really have to revisit, in terms of even environmental factors. And for the financial side, now 5G use cases, innovation and R&D, many countries are having now to have these sandboxes, pilots to actually justify that migration path to not only to the government, but also to the consumer who is king. There is this one about tax exemption for infrastructure stimulus. That's something that a lot of countries have done, and it's working well for them. Something we could possibly look at as island states in terms of how we maybe possibly could discount, and we have in the past, especially in Jamaica with the 700, there was a discount factor applied. And in the case also of the recent 600, what we recently tendered, there was a discount factor also applied because we want to encourage deployment. Because again, so we don't want to hold the spectrum, we want the spectrum to be used and ensure that persons are connected across the world. So countries assign spectrum and implement infrastructure policies, facilitating deployment. And in some cases, they even establish specific incentives for 5G networks, as we have seen. And services could include fiscal incentives, as mentioned, direct funding, depending on the country, of course. And the policies may include guidelines to promote passive infrastructure and network sharing to reduce the costs of 5G deployment, which is again critical because at the end of the day, the MNOs are not doing this just for charity. They're doing it to make money, to at least break even in some instances where, making a profit is not really on the table, but connecting is important. Granting operators access to publicly owned infrastructure to install 5G base stations like government buildings, as I said before. And again, new policies were adopted very recently in some jurisdictions. Hong Kong, in fact, presented a new bill in December, I think it was 2023, that, if approved, will facilitate access to building, land, telecom installations. And Hong Kong also approved a tax deductions on 5G deployments from January 2024. So again, the world is moving towards connecting. We know this, China is one of the largest ones who is ahead of the pack in terms of, the whole promotion of research and development surrounding 6G. And they have also established an IMT 2030 6G promotional group since 2021. So their ministry issued in July 2023 a new version of the regulations of the People of the Republic of China radio frequency allocation. And in there, they allocated a 6 gigahertz band for 5G and 6G systems. And the government reported this in February of this year, 2024. So as mobile 5G networks and services become available in increasing numbers of countries around the world, there is a broad consensus among industry players that 6G might become commercially available, at least in some countries, from as early as 2030. This global trend report provides an overview of, in essence, the current research and standards and efforts in launching, which Colin has on their site, and I urge you all to take a look at it because it's really insightful. There's no stopping, progress. As I said, the generations, we have seen the generations coming from 2 to 3, and now we are 5 going on to 6, coexisting with 4. So again, these are things that are going to happen. And these are a couple of other pointers that happen. So for example, in India, the Prime Minister Modi launched a vision statement in March of 23 for rollout of 6 gigahertz by 2030. Japan also did a similar thing, and Korea as well, and Singapore. So one of the most recent industry papers on the 6G was published in April 2022 by Nokia Bell Labs. And the paper explored the aspect of the 6G vision, use cases, and enablers for 6G architecture, which are currently being, envisioned by the Nokia Labs. So Nokia compared 5G with 6G networks, and it required more spectrum. And the US industry initiatives compose more than 80 organizations and over 600 experts from the field. And they're all working in alliance. And there are the mobile operators such as AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, and Google and Meta vendors, Ericsson, Intel, and Nokia have been creating this next G alliance and has issued a series of publications, a roadmap to 6G, and a report on the 6G use case uses as well, and the sustainability of 6G. So work is being done, and there is no stopping 6G. So again, we have to join the pack. So I hope you found this discussion interesting, and I really want to thank you for the time today that you've spent with me. And I look forward to seeing you once again online. Thank you all for your attention, and have a wonderful rest of the day, evening, or afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Thank you.